Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to JJ, the JJ Dillon podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz, and with me is the star of the show, two-time Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, of course, former WWF and WCW executive, JJ Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine. I think you should always qualify that by saying the second greatest manager by his own declaration behind Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Yes, okay. I think it would be great to talk about the original Four Horsemen. I think you might be pretty familiar given your history with those guys, right?
Yes.
Now, there is a great book out there. I know you're very familiar with it, by Dick Bourne, of course, MidAtlanticGateway.com, called The Four Horsemen, A Timeline History. And they have some great, great stuff in there about the Four Horsemen, have some interesting stuff. And, you know, when you think back about the Four Horsemen, you always think of Oli, Tully, Arn, yourself, and Ric Flair as the original, but technically speaking, you weren't actually a part of the original grouping, even though you technically are. Am I right on that? That you were just almost a few weeks after that.
I think initially I only managed or only was associated with Tully Blanchard.
Right. And it was almost like Baby Doll was kind of there with Tully and then kind of faded away, and then you entered the fray with Tully Blanchard and Tully Blanchard Enterprises. What was the kind of relationship with you and Tully at this point? I mean, pre-Horseman, as you're joining him. What was the relationship like with Tully?
Oh, geez. Tully and I go back when he was at West Texas State around the same time as Ted DiBiase. Circa 1975, I was still active in my career and in main events in West Texas out of Amarillo. And, of course, we would regularly get to see Ted DiBiase and Tully Blanchard and a lot of the guys that came out of West Texas State. So I knew Tully from way back then, and of course also worked for his father, Joe Blanchard, in San Antonio.
And how would you say the relationship as far as like chemistry and everything with him? You always got along with him very well?
Oh, absolutely. Always, one of my closest friends and somebody who I greatly respect and admire.
Is that one of those things where before you're paired up with him, you want to be paired up with him, or is just kind of what Dusty wanted, whoever's booking at the time, that's what they want? They want to put you guys together.
I never ever felt that I was pushed into any kind of a long-range, high-profile relationship with anybody in the business. I think if you're going to do something that's out there in the public to any degree, it's good to have a comfort level with the people that you're working with. So it's not like it's something that it's just a given that anybody who is doing anything at that level makes sure that that there's a good, comfortable relationship between all the parties involved.
And around this time when you were almost going to be managing Tully and just kind of leading up to that, you were actually managing a different Nature Boy Buddy Landell, and leading him to to try to get to the national title and leading him to Starrcade 85. What was it like working with a guy like Buddy Landell?
He was a guy that anybody that ever met Buddy had good things to say about him. He was a very, very likable guy, and that was the same experience that I had. And Buddy, unfortunately, it seemed just a lot of times didn't make good decisions with regard to his career, and he was his own worst enemy. But as a person and as a professional, I really liked Buddy, enjoyed working with him, and really, just virtually everybody that I ever worked with over any appreciable length of time. You're in this business as anything in life, any kind of adventure. You're always going to be closer to some people than you are with others, but I always wanted to have a good relationship with everybody. Again, realizing that you're going to be closer personally with some than others.
And it seems like when Buddy was there, had a little bit of a feud with Ric Flair, the Battle of the Nature Boys, that whole thing. It seems like you were right. He's making some poor decisions. He ends up getting fired, and that's kind of when they put you with Tully. Why? Do you remember why he was fired? Was it something, like you said, he kept making bad decisions? Was there a reason for the firing?
I really don't have any strong recollection. And I know that he suffered a severe injury outside of a sliding glass door at a hotel where there was bad weather and ice and snow or something accumulated, and he slipped and suffered a pretty significant injury, as I remember.
It is crazy kind of what leads people to certain things, because if he doesn't get fired, if whatever happens with him doesn't happen, you may not end up with the Four Horsemen. You may not end up with Tully. So they ended up putting you around Starrcade time, around that Christmas break time. They ended up putting you with Tully together immediately on TV in Greensboro. Did you sense a connection with Tully immediately?
You know, you're kind of bringing back a lot of memories, much of which, it's great to rekindle these things. I've interacted with so many people with so many levels over all the years. A lot of it gets lost with the passing of time. But with Tully, he was somebody who, along with Ted DiBiase, around the time, and I was still active in my career, and in Amarillo, main eventing with Dick Murdoch, and the guys that attended West Texas State would always come down to the matches at the Amarillo Sports Arena, and that was often the first time I got to know any of these guys on a personal level.
Now, with Greensboro, North Carolina, obviously, I mean, that's just kind of synonymous with Crockett and promotions and with NWA, and it was such a big thing. When they put you and Tully together, is there talks at all about creating a group or anything? Because it just seems like everything kind of just happened organically, and it was almost not like happenstance. Well, I guess it really is happenstance, but it's not really a mistake. But they kind of put you guys together slowly but surely, and obviously you become eventually the executive director with Tully, but then they put you guys all together. Was there any talk before that of like, oh, we need a super group, we need a faction, we need, Dusty to have heels? I mean, was there any talk of any of that?
No, it was, as you've kind of alluded to, it was just something that step by step transpired, and it wasn't part of any master plan that unfolded. And that happens a lot of times in this profession. And sometimes so-called great ideas that are thought out and thought are going to just be instant successes for some reason fall flat in their face, and other things that are more spontaneous, that are a result of not of great depth or planning before, are the things that are become the biggest and most lasting. And that's happened a lot of times in the business, and maybe that's part of what makes the world of professional wrestling so intriguing.
Absolutely. And I think that in this period of time, there wasn't really that many stables. I mean, there had been stables before, but am I right on that? There was really no prominent stable as far as, I mean, the level and the size and just the magnitude and the heat and everything else of the Four Horsemen.
Yeah, Gary Hart had his Hart's Army before that with Pak Song Nam, but it wasn't really the thing with the Horsemen, and was, I think, there's never really a first in wrestling. If you're a historian, somebody can go back and say, well, what about this, and find something in history and say, oh yeah, that's right. But it was certainly impactful in my career. It was a point of, where things really, really grew from that point and excelled for me. And I was dealing with people, guys like Tully and Arn and Barry Windham and Flair. I mean, to this point later, we're 30 some years later, we're all personal friends.
Is it crazy in the wrestling business, if you think about it, that many years later, not only you still remembered fondly and people still want to meet you and all this other stuff, but the fact that you can still remain friends after that period of time?
Yeah, I guess, it is unique in many ways, but I always was lucky that the people, there were even times I would hear that there would be tag teams, often brothers, that were successful in the business, but on the personal side, either hated each other, never traveled together, and all you saw was the image of them together on television. And I never encountered that. Of course, maybe like for me, maybe it's my personality. I'm easygoing, and if I find that people are difficult to deal with or there are issues, before I get deeply involved, I try to subtly distance myself and go off in another direction. And I don't like to get ever in a situation where now you're going public and saying negative things about other people. I was always of the opinion that if you don't have something good to say about somebody, then don't say anything at all.
And the interesting thing about this group of guys and how they come together, and we're kind of saying it's happenstance, but what is the story? I mean, you always hear the story of they had so much time and, they're cutting local promos and they just throw everybody together. Obviously, Oli and Arn are together, tag team. You had Flair, who said storyline was their cousins, so they kind of grouped them together. Then you and Tully are together, and obviously those three are big heels, and you and Tully are a heel group, and they kind of put you together. So what is the true story? Is it that you guys were cutting some local promos, and Arn, comes up with it and just says it, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and just cuts that great promo that we've read so many times? Is that the real true story of what happened and how you guys formed? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, back in those days, it was before the internet and cable television, and, a lot of the information, Meltzer's newsletter was circulated, which would give you in the business information as to who was doing what in other territories. That, you'd read about friends or that you'd work with and they were somewhere else and being successful. And so that weekly newsletter was heavily circulated, behind the scenes. And for whatever the reason, the promoters disliked having talent have information and know what other people were doing. And I never really understood, why they all felt so strongly about that. I mean, there were some places that, that they said if you were caught reading, the newsletter that you'd be fired. And I never really understood that.
And it's crazy, like, as far as, things like that and how things get thrown together and how it kind of got out that, Arn is, basically he's a Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but the Four Horsemen moniker definitely wasn't planned from the start. And they always say that, due to, time constraints at a TV taping, whatever, they kind of just threw everybody together and said, you're all cutting this promo. You're not necessarily together or whatever, but, you're all just going to cut a promo. And that's how it was born. But it was almost one of those things where it's like, that was actually better than anything you could script. It's almost better to have something like that, right? Absolutely right.
And at that point, the TBS show, if there was not a preemption for baseball or something, was a 2-hour show every Saturday, and that was in addition to whatever syndication, at least one, if not two syndication shows that maybe you would be doing for Crockett. So there was a lot of television content, and especially with the TBS show, because it was 2 hours and there were so many breaks in there. And, just some guys weren't real good at doing a generic interview to fill, say, a 2-minute time slot. And I always had a gift of being able to just take some idea, even if it wasn't a hard sell for a particular area that we're going or a particular thing. It was a good way to mention some of the towns that you were appearing in or hopeful of being appearing in, and it was a good way to kind of introduce other talent that was coming into the picture. But there was a case where Arn came in. I did not know Arn personally before he arrived, and he just, some things magically just happen, and that was one of those things. And Arn just, he was like, it was destined that he was going to come there and be a part of what we were doing, and he's the one that I give credit to doing that interview. And like I say, because we had to fill a lot of 2-minute spots where we weren't talking about a specific event coming up, or kind of just generically talking about towns in an area or talking about talent. And as my recollection is that, and what would happen too a lot of times, which says a lot for that group, that everybody was at the top of their game, and it wasn't like somebody was being brought along and gotten the rub from other people that were already there. And so we would often do interviews together, and there wasn't like some situations with some people, like if you had a 2-minute spot to do and there was a tag team or 4 guys, there were some guys whose feelings would be hurt, or he maybe even insulted if in that 2-minute interview, if they didn't have part of it to say something. We were all at a level that we were already there, and if there was an interview that anybody started with, a lot of times it wasn't thought out ahead of time, where you even had specific bullet points. A lot of it was very spontaneous. They were all good talkers and could carry an interview. And if we started with something like with, say, Arn, and all of a sudden Arn's on a roll, and he would carry the whole 2-minute interview. And the important part in that kind of thing is for the people that surround him to be in tune with the interview, even if they were not saying something. In other words, I would often use my eyeglasses as a prop. Somebody's saying something, and I kind of move my eyeglasses and cock my head a little bit. There's those little subtle nuances that you're not just standing there like a statue while somebody's doing a promo. And the same thing with being a manager in the corner of an event. You're out there as a catalyst to help get the people to want to come see that event and buy a ticket. But they don't come to want to see you necessarily, but you're there. And so I would sit there and I would consciously watch the match as if I was the fan sitting in the front row. And I would sit there and I would look intent. And if my guy did something offensive that was, he was taking over in the match, I'd, boy, I'm drawing a fist, and it's like kind of like a cheerleader. And if the other opponent all of a sudden is getting the best of my guy, he's taking a punch, and I'm cocking my head and kind of registering with that each punch as if he was hitting me too. And that sounds so subtle, and it is subtle, but it's a nuance that, I would have people sitting in front row ringside that first would watch me, because a lot of times I would take a chair and sit down and not really do anything, and the people would watch for a while and wondering what I'm going to do. And a lot of times and there were other people, everybody had their own style as a manager. And my feeling was, I'm a means of getting the fans hopefully interested in the match, and they tune up and show up and buy a ticket or turn on the TV to watch a match, not necessarily to watch me. But at the same time, I don't sit there kind of like a statue, that I'm involved in the match. If they're going to be interested in the match, how can I expect them to be interested if I'm not interested? So I register with my guys. I kind of cheer them when they're getting new and they're getting beaten. And on the receiving end, I'm sitting back in my chair and I'm almost feeling the punches the same as they are. And I think that's important to the fans, because it shows that you are genuinely interested and a part of what's going on. It sounds so so subtle, but it is. It is subtle, but it's also incredibly important.
Another thing you used to do, which was always so great and very subtle, is, let's say Tully or Orange, they're making a really good point. You take off the glasses, and then you'd kind of put it in your teeth, or put it in your mouth, as if like, wow, they're really making a good point, and you're really kind of sinking into it, and you're really like listening, like, and as a fan, you're like, oh, I really got to pay attention. JJ is really focused in on this. I must really have to pay attention to focus in on this. Very subtle, but great.
Yeah, it's a thin line because you don't want your facial reactions or your responses to whatever they're saying to then be the focal point of attention. It's I guess one of the reasons that I had significant success, because I had a knack of even if I wasn't conducting the interview or had any important comment to make, if you were watching an interview with somebody who I was managing, especially if it was a minute or two, you never saw me standing there with a blank look on my face like my mind is 1,000 miles away somewhere else. Again, how can I expect the fan to tune in and listen to everything that's being said if I'm standing there and the manager for somebody and not interested myself? Very important.
Right. So when Orange says Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, you guys like the Four Horsemen, Oli, Tully, obviously it's going to be yourself, Orange, and Flair. Is that something where immediately it like clicks in your head and clicks in their head, like, we got something here, this is going to be great, this is awesome, kind of just said it, and I think that's, we're going to roll with this and this is going to be huge? Or was this just another promo and let's kind of move on to the next one?
It was just one of those things and that's, why Arn is a treasure in our business, because he always, and to this day, gives a lot of thought with anything that he's talking about. And in that case, he talked about, never, I almost can memorize the promo where he's saying to somebody sitting there, take a look at the screen. He said, look at the people that are in this screen. And he said, they dominate this profession. And trying to draw a comparison, I have to go outside the wrestling business, and the closest I can come to it is to talk about the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and held up the four fingers. It was just a line that I don't know if he gave a lot of thought to, that just because some great things came out of him, and maybe we're nodding as he's talking. And it really wasn't until that was like on a Saturday, and we had a Greensboro show that night, and we go to Greensboro, and we go into the ring, and there was a group of guys that were regulars that had the whole front row on the one side. They were kind of heel fans, and we looked over, and they're looking with a smile on their face and holding up four fingers, and they're chanting "Horsemen, Horsemen." And it was a week or two went by, and Jimmy Crockett one day says to me, he said, "What's this thing about Horsemen I keep hearing about?" I said, well, it's something that Arn, just in his great mind, threw out there, and it struck a note with apparently a significant number of the fans, because that night when we went to the arena, they were yelling "Horsemen" and holding up the four singles that has become the symbol of excellence. And I said, I think you should pay attention to it, because it wasn't like this is an idea that how can we market this? How can we sell this? We all have to say this. It wasn't like that. It just was something that Arn said, and the fans heard it. And that night, like I said, we went to the arena. They hear a lot of interviews and a lot of things you say. You think, oh boy, I hope this is a good interview and gets the point across or whatever. And then something as simple as that is what they remember. And they say Horsemen, and they're holding up, and they are the ones that started it, and they're the ones that kept it going.
Such a great, memorable promo. The only time this much havoc has been reached by this few number of people, you need to go all the way back to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Just such an awesome, memorable quote by Arn. And he's so smart. I don't even know if he realizes how smart he is sometimes with some of these awesome quotes.
He's so talented that it just flows from him. And that faction, if I call it a faction rather than say, well, a team or group, we're different. We were different than everybody else. That's why I try to latch onto a word or a term that you don't hear that often. But we were a faction, and we were people that each member was already at the top of their game. A lot of times you'll have, three guys, which was a little bit of a degree when they brought Luger in. When they finally, because Luger was just starting in Florida. He had the body, and he got sideways with Bruiser Brody, if I remember correctly, and he was in a cage match down there, and Brody had a short fuse, and I don't know what Luger did that set him off, but oh boy, it's like it got so bad for Luger that Luger finally climbed out of the cage of his own power, walked straight to the dressing room, grabbed his clothes under his arm, and out the back door, and was gone. It just, oh boy, Bruiser Brody was one of a kind. Boy, Frank Goodish, I have such great fond memories of him. He was a treasure in our business, and it was a sad thing that we lost him under the circumstances, and so young, because God, he was one of the all-time greats.
There's no doubt about that. So great. And that's funny because that's how you basically get Luger, and then Oli wants to go a separate way. But rewinding just a bit, I definitely want to get to that in a second, but definitely want to touch on Oli, because he's one of those guys that people are just like, man, I mean, they either have a strong opinion of him, they hate him, or they have a strong opinion, they love him, that's the way it is. Like if you ask Arn, he thinks Oli's great, loves him, has nothing bad to say about him.
Put my name on that list too.
Oh, okay. I was going to say,
huge Oli fan. Huge Oli fan.
How come it's like that though? You either love him or you absolutely hate him. How come he's like that?
Well, I went to Crockett Promotions, I think in '71, and when I got there, Oli and Gene were the top tag team, and so I was around Oli, and I was, I was a little bit old. I wasn't a kid. Like I say, I was close to my 28th birthday, so I got kind of, for a young guy coming in, kind of got treated a little bit differently than, say, another young guy that was a lot younger in age. And I kept my mouth shut, and I was like a sponge, just wanting to absorb everything that I could, take the things that I thought applied to me, and just to be informed about everything. So I made a lot of trips with Oli. And Oli at that time, boy, he was big into the stock market, and he would spend all kinds of time charting stocks, and he took pride in wanting to take the money that he made in the business and put it to work for him. And he used to kind of make fun of guys who wanted to go out and impress the girls and spend a lot of money on clothing or buy fancy cars that they really couldn't afford. And I call that the myth, like in my book, because their wrestling fans would see you on television and say, "Oh, wow, you're on TV. You're a huge star. You must be a millionaire. You must be making all kinds of money." And a lot of the guys in the wrestling business, most of them, just made a living. And a lot of those same guys bought cars fancier than what they could really afford with the money they were making. And because they got wrapped up in what I call the myth, was they were trying to live up to an image of what the fans thought they would be, and spent every dollar to do it. And some guys ended up, their career was over and had nothing left to show for it, which was very sad.
And with Oli, it seemed like he was kind of against that Ric Flair style and those guys, that myth style. We're like, oh, I'm going to spend this amount of money. Was he completely against the Horseman style? When you think of the Horseman style, the symbol of excellence, think of the Rolex watches, the limousines, the Jeff, all that kind of stuff. Was he against that style?
Well, he was his own. They used to say what did he say? He was the captain of his own ship, I think is what he used to say. And he just believed in you can be in this business and have a run, and a lot of times there's no guarantee of how long that run's going to last and how big it's going to become. And Oli was somebody who wasn't about dressing to impress other people. I remember he had I forget what kind of car it was, but I remember it had a convertible top, and it had like 200,000 miles on it. And he wasn't into having an image of the big fancy car. He was about making money in the business and saving every dollar that he could. And he was into tracking stocks and trying to take his money and make it work for him. So I really liked Oli. Like you said, guys either loved him or hate him, and most of them didn't like Oli because Oli was not a politician. And unlike a lot of guys in the business that would tell somebody what they wanted to hear, Oli didn't sugarcoat anything. He told it like it was. And I had no problem with that. And so I became good friends with Oli, and I made a lot of trips with him. He used to travel a lot by himself because guys didn't want to travel with him. If we would ride in the car, and sometimes it'd be a relatively long trip, and he wouldn't be in the mood to talk, and neither would I, and we would ride a long distance and not say anything, and it wouldn't feel uncomfortable. It just, that's how it was. And if we got into a conversation about something, Oli would tell you how he felt, and with him, it was strictly a business. I want to make as much money as I can, and I want to save that money. And he had a lot of children that he had to support and put towards their future. So just I have nothing but positive thoughts about Oli. And again, I had no problem with being around somebody that told you honestly how they felt and how it was. And I took the business seriously. I didn't. So I could go with Oli, and we could talk about anything. I wasn't really into the stock market like he was, but because I wasn't at the point yet where I had any kind of appreciable income for the business that I was worrying about how I was going to invest it. But he just was a good businessman, and to this day he's a good friend. The last time I saw him was a couple years ago. I had gone to I had my sister who was down at the South Carolina beach or something, and I was going down to Atlanta to see one of my other children driving down. And so I went to visit my sister on the beach, and then as I was driving across to go to Atlanta, it wasn't out of the way to make a point of going by and seeing Oli, I think in Athens. And so, I called ahead of time, and Marcia told me that he's a creature of habit, and there was a place that he liked to go to every day and for lunch that had a buffet that was very much to his liking. Told me where it was and what time Oli would get there every day, and that's where I went and sat down with him, and and had a great lunch. And then they were used to Oli being there, and so we sat there probably for 2 hours after that, just having conversation. And I could talk to Oli forever just because he's got such a great mind.
It is funny, like how he it's weird. Away from TV and away from the cameras, he doesn't fit the group. But when you put him on TV, it's like he fits the group perfectly, and he was awesome for the group. And he was kind of the enforcer before Arn became the enforcer of the group. So it was really kind of a cool dynamic with those four, and then throw you obviously in there as well. Yeah. Isn't that crazy though? Away from TV, doesn't fit the group. On TV, fits like a glove.
Well, really, but if you also think about Flair used to talk about the limousine riding, high flying, jet flying, kiss stealing son of a gun. When Flair was doing interviews like that, I could stay there with a little smirk on my face, and Tully would be, but it didn't fit Oli. And so you didn't see Oli in that scenario very often because that wasn't Oli.
Yeah, it didn't fit him, and obviously it fit Flair perfectly. What was your relationship like with the Nature Boy?
We've been friends for a long time. First time I met him, this was back before the internet, before cable television, and I was still active in my career, and I was in Amarillo, and I was a main eventer down there. And Flair was just getting started in the Carolinas and had just set the place on fire. And George Scott apparently saw the potential, and it's like if you see a guy that you think has the ability to be a future world champion, you need to get him out of that territory and have him go to St. Louis, have him go here. So he booked Flair out so that other territories would be exposed to him. So he came to Amarillo for a week, and I was working there, and I had him ride with me every day. And he just, right from the very beginning, he was somebody that I just enjoyed being around and just fascinated by how successful he'd become in such a short period of time.
You think he is the glue or the mix or whatever you want to say, the glue guy of the Horsemen? Like the Horsemen doesn't exist without Flair?
Yeah, probably so. And the thing about this profession is so much is spontaneous. If somebody said, "Oh, we should get a group, and I think 4 guys is about the right number, and we need to give them a catchy name, called the 4 Horsemen, and we could get this guy and this." Things like that don't happen because the ultimate judge and jury is the wrestling fan. And if you spend a lot of time and effort with a conceptual idea like that you want to try and take, and then I'm going to make the people are going to believe in this because I'm going to shove it down their throat, that's when you get the most resistance and something that the fans least can relate to. And yet when you got the group of guys that come together that have a chemistry between them, that translates through the television to the fans in a way that if we had an understanding of what that was and how it happened, people like me would be extremely wealthy today because, okay, I'm got this concept and these are the guys and this is the idea. Because you could do 10 things like that, and 10 things would go one time out there, and the fans would be blowing their nose at it. And yet, you have something out there with 4 guys, and it's like with Jimmy Crockett. Arn used the thing on the interview, say, look at the screen. I can remember that interview as if it was today, and it's over 30-some years ago, where he said, take a look at your screen. And he said, never in the history of our profession have 4 individuals so dominated the industry. And he said, you got to go out of wrestling to try and find something comparable. And he said, I have to go to my history book to the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse and held up 4 fingers. And there was a throwaway line just because Arn, that's how his interviews were different. He would bring in a thought like that you would think, oh, you'd never hear that in a wrestling interview. And that night we went to the arena, and I remember we went to Greensboro, and the fans were yelling, 4 Horsemen, and holding up the 4 fingers. And they are the ones that then took that seed at that moment that was planted by Oli Anderson, and it's become huge. And just, I'm so thankful that I was there at that time and a part of it.
As far as you and kind of being in the mix with those guys and just really kind of being the perfect fit, like I always talk to Tully, and he always says, JJ never tries to do too much, or JJ never tries to overpower, or JJ knows just when to say the right thing or do the right thing. Is that a conscious effort to not overshadow those guys, or is it just one of those things where it's like you guys had such good chemistry, you knew each other so well, each knew exactly what to do and when to do it?
Yeah, it was something that I just worked instinctively and always had it. And I was blessed with this ability, I guess, to understand the moment, understand the people that I was surrounded with. And it was like, I remember an interview that I did with Luger, and Luger thought that he was the greatest interview of all times, and Lex was okay. He wasn't. And I managed him one time, and I remember he was doing an interview, and I never said a word, but I was right next to him. And when I watched the interview play, Luger would talk, and if you're having a conversation and you make a point, you might make a hand motion or something, and he would be talking and he would go at a point when it meant absolutely nothing. and I was next to him, and without saying a word and without distracting from what he was saying, it's like you say, I'd be watching, I remove my glasses and kind of like just sometimes just touching my finger to my cheek, and a lot of times I'd be and I would just cut my eyes over where you would see that I was looking at him without turning my head, and so that I didn't it's like I was tuned in to everything that he was saying and reacting to it in a subtle way without stealing the moment from him, because he was the one doing the interview. And my logic always was, well, if I'm just standing there like a dummy or I'm looking out like my mind is somewhere else and I'm thinking about where we're going that night or where I'm going to have dinner, and my eyes are wandering and I'm not paying attention to him, my logic always was, well, if somebody's sitting at home or sitting in the arena and sees me not, even though I'm not speaking, not being attentive to what the interview is being saying, how can I expect the person sitting out there that bought a ticket or watching on television to be interested in it if I'm not interested? And I consciously never got that thought out of my mind, that I never wanted to overreact, that I became the focus of attention to take away from the person that was doing the interview. But what I did was I tried to compliment it and to show interest in what was being said, and you could do it in so many subtle ways, just with an eye glance or kind of cocking your head that way, or a lot of times you could put your head down and just rub your forehead, and then all of a sudden he makes a point and you look up and you're kind of nodding yes. So I had great success of doing those things subtly that looked very spontaneous, but it was something that I worked at very hard.
And with you guys and the Four Horsemen, I think that's the perfect thing. Everyone complimented each other so well, especially that original group. Just such a great compliment. One guy complimented the other, and it was all kind of about making sure, that either tag champs, national champ, TV champ, obviously Flair being a world champ. It was always, you guys wanted to maintain the excellence, wanted to maintain being champions, always maybe about Flair making sure he could stay on top.
Yep. I think, and the reason was everybody had confidence in their own ability and the role that they played as part of that group. It wasn't like, that's the sad thing about, there were a lot of managers that would do things around ringside almost like I've got to do something to justify why I'm even out here. Or maybe the promoter would say, well, business gets a little tough and I got to cut back. Do I really need that manager? So a lot of them would have the thing, well, I got to be out there doing something so the promoter always sees me, and I got to, condition his thinking that I'm an important ingredient of what's going on here. And I that never entered my thought process. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I had a very successful in-ring career. And so that was an ability that I possessed, that if it eventually came to a deal where, you do something and they want you to be in the ring with tights on, and no. And finally the powers to be force you, and it happens. And then I learned that from Bobby Heenan, that there is an art to wrestling like a manager. And boy, is that so important, because there's an expectation that if you go out there as a wrestler and you're very polished and your timing is right there, they don't necessarily, the fans think about it at that moment, but if they think about it after, it's like, that's not why I thought the manager would look more uncomfortable and not be smooth and not be polished. So that was the Bobby Heenan teaching me to wrestle and work like a manager, not a wrestler.
That is such a great point, and you got to love the brain on that one.
Oh, yeah.
As far as like the Horsemen itself, it just seemed like perfect foils for Dusty Rhodes, perfect foils for guys like Road Warriors, Magnum TA, Nikita Koloff, like just the perfect foils. Is that kind of a reason for Dusty giving the big push? It's like, man, not really the reason, obviously money, them being so well, you guys being over, but was that just perfect for Dusty to have you guys as the foil?
I think so, because if you take let's say an Abdullah the Butcher. Abdullah the Butcher is a monster, goes out there, and the first time that he's defeated, a lot of the mystique is taken off of him.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We had the ability of going out there every week and getting our butts kicked, and then going on television and giving our version of what happened, where we were mistreated, and what you see is not really what it was. And all of a sudden fans were more angry because I was there and saw it. What, you're lying. What are you talking? What you want me to buy your story? And people would get more angry because you're giving your version of a scenario where you were out there and got your butt kicked. And as a result, the fans would say, well, I hope he gets him back there in the ring and he takes a beating twice what he took last time. And that's a lost art, to be able to do that. You go out there and give the fans what they paid to see, but not give them don't give them the whole pie, save some, and be able to go on TV and then lie about what happened and give your version of the story and just enrage the people that say, what? I was there and saw you get your butt kicked. You're not the wrestler that he was. He's far better than you are, but apparently he need to get you back in there and beat you up worse than you were when I saw you. That's a lost art. It really, really is.
Flair, Arn, and Tully are the masters of that. I mean, cutting the promo, taking great bumps, great selling, getting their ass kicked, and then the fans hate them even more. They want them to get them back. That's why Dusty liked working with those guys. It's got to be. I mean, so like the perfect guys to kind of, be almost the Joker to the Batman. If there's not that good villain, the good guy isn't that good, right? I mean, it's like the perfect combination.
And we were all friends. And like whether it was an interview or even a match, there were times where one guy would start a match and be out there for 20 minutes, and the guy would be in the ring 18 minutes, and you'd come in and maybe you end up dropping the fall. Well, if you work the apron the right way for those 18 minutes, you're still part of the match. And that is an element of talent that is lost in many ways with the business today. To be able to be the guy on the outside that still is an important part of what's taking place.
I love that when you did get physically involved, it really meant something. Like when they put you in War Games stuff, obviously this is later on, but they put you in War Games stuff. I mean, you get hurt for real, but when they put you in there, the crowd despises you. I mean, they literally want to kill you. They love it. It was almost like you wait for the manager to get beat up. Am I right on this? It's like it's got to be a certain timing aspect.
We're on Skype, right?
Well, yes.
You see it?
Yep.
That's a
shoulders all screwed up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's that. Every morning when I get up, there it is. I have a hump where that I went to the hospital that night, and they said, well, you would need surgery for us to repair that, and the other option is you'll be in a sling for 6 weeks, but you're going to have this hump up there. And I thought, well, I wasn't somebody that was wanting to go to the beach and try to impress any of the young ladies, because I wasn't a gym rat anyway. So I never had. It's maybe my badge of courage that I still, after 30 some years later, look in the mirror and say, I don't have any pain from it. It looks grotesque, but it doesn't really affect my ability or range of motion. But it certainly doesn't look very pretty.
I love, that you got involved. It obviously sucks you get injured in a match like that. But as far as the original group, the original Horsemen, talking about Oli Anderson, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Flair, and yourself, is that kind of the group when you think about the Four Horsemen? Is that the original is the best, and that's what you got to stick with, or you think there's another group that was better, or is that the four? That's your favorite.
What were the names again?
The original: Oli, Arn, yourself, obviously Rick and Tully.
Yeah, and the thing with Oli, he wasn't there that long, and again, the Flair a lot of times, set the tone for the interview with the limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, son of a gun. I could have a little smirk on my face and Tully standing there. Yeah, he kind of factored himself to be a ladies' man. And you looked at Oli and said, what's he doing out there? This can't apply to him. And he would just keep a straight face. And so, but I also look at Oli as he was the original. And if it hadn't been for Oli, then maybe none of the other things that followed would have gone the way that they did. So Oli was an original Horseman, and he was as good as they get. He's a great talent, and he was somebody in the business that a lot of people didn't like him because he wasn't political. He would tell you exactly how he felt and didn't sugarcoat it. And a lot of guys didn't like that about him. But I always got along with him and traveled with him and regard him as a friend to this day. And I'm a very private person. I don't make regular phone calls to the guys. And when I am somewhere and get to see them, boy, I savor those moments.
And a lot of people say, the older fans, of course, the Andersons, Gene Anderson, even the Lars Anderson to a point, but really Gene and Oli kind of were the precursor to the Horsemen. Obviously, Arn is a cousin who becomes a brother. So, they were really the precursor to the Four Horsemen in a certain way.
And when you think about it, how many things in wrestling can you go and say, well, this all started 30-some years ago and is still perpetuated today? I still get booked for appearances to go to fan fests, or we'll go to independent shows, and they bring me for half hour or 45 minutes before the show starts, or that plus intermission, to be there and be available for photo ops and just to sign stuff. And it's God, I'm so blessed that like you say, 30 some years later, that there's a huge base of fans out there, that the Horsemen are just at a level that I'm knock on wood, that hopefully will never be forgotten. And it's because we were the right place, the right time, with the right group, and we worked hard every night in every town. And that's one thing about Flair, that he will go down as a great champion, and maybe the greatest champion of all time, because a lot of people at his level would go, and if there's 8 or 10,000 people there, they go out there and give it all. And I've been to arena that whether the local TV got preempted, and we get to the arena with the anticipation that we're going to have a really big crowd, and there's 400 or 500 people there, maybe 300 people there. And there are guys who would say, well, I'm not going to go out and risk maybe getting hurt, or and will unconsciously go out there and give a half a performance. Ric Flair will give you the same performance if there are 20 people out there, or if there were 20,000 people out there. And that's why history will show him to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest champion of all time, because that was his work ethic. And the guys that were around him, I think I do adopt that same philosophy. I go out there and I look at the people that are there, whether it's 20 people or 20,000. Each of those people spent their hard-earned money to buy a ticket with an expectation from you. And if you go there and don't perform at the level that they anticipate because there aren't as many people there as they expected or whatever, then you've cheated those people that bought that ticket with an anticipation, and you've cheated yourself. Because I was a fan when it started, and I went out there, and So I never forgot that part of the business, that I go out there and with the same level. I don't want to go out there and get hurt. And I'm not saying that I take shortcuts, because I don't, but I take pride in the fact that my performance level every night that I'm anywhere is the same, regardless of how many people that are there. And because of that, more often than not, there's more people, because that is the work ethic that I subscribe to, as do the Horsemen. And that's why 30 years later, they still talk about the Four Horsemen, because they know anytime that they came to see us, that they were going to see what they anticipated when they bought that ticket.
Four Horsemen, definitely the greatest faction of all time in your view. Nobody better.
Absolutely, for me. Maybe a little prejudice, but yeah, yep. And Gary Hart had Hart's army with Pak Song Nam, but the Four Horsemen was something that again, Arn threw that line out there, and the fans picked up on it. So it was really something that they created, and then it just perpetuated. And I think sometimes, wow, that's 30 some years later, 88, 98, 08, 18. It's 30 plus years later, and we had to do something right that they still remember